Bob Marley had 7 children outside his marriage. Because of this, rumors flew around that he never really loved Rita and that she didn't give him peace at home. But no one ever truly heard Rita Marley's side of the story. Now, in her own memoir, Rita finally opens up, and what she shares about her marriage to the reggae legend is painful, from being called his sister in public to dealing with his affairs and distance. Rita Marley was born on July 25, 1946, in Santiago de Cuba. When Rita was just 3 months old, her family moved to Kingston, Jamaica. That's where she grew up, but in a tough but lively part of the city called Trenchtown. Trenchtown wasn't just any neighborhood. Many famous musicians came from there, along with some of Jamaica's best athletes, business leaders, and even politicians. Her father, Leroy Anderson, was a musician who also worked as a carpenter. He took care of Rita and sometimes brought her along when he was doing carpentry jobs. Things got even harder when she was 5 years old. Her mother, Cynthia, left her father and started a new life with another man. But what hurt even more was that her mother only took her lighter-skinned brother, Donovan, with her leaving Rita and her other brother, Wesley, behind. Before her father took full responsibility, Rita Marley's childhood was split between her mother's house and her grandmother's. Her father, Leroy, didn't like this. Maybe it was because he didn't want his children growing up in another man's home. One day, Leroy decided he was ready to take full charge of raising Rita and her brother Wesley. He asked his sister, Viola, to help. Viola didn't have children of her own, and she was focused on building a life with her husband. She didn't think it was her job to raise someone else's kids. But their grandparents had a soft spot for Rita and Wesley. They stepped in and spoke to Viola, encouraging her to help raise the children, and eventually, she agreed. Rita's new home was filled with music. Her Aunt Viola sang in the church choir. One of the biggest influences on young Rita was her Uncle Cleveland. He had a deep, strong voice and was often asked to sing at weddings and community events. Being surrounded by so much music, it was only natural that Rita got pulled in. Her voice stood out from an early age, and her aunt noticed it too and began teaching her songs. Whenever visitors came around, Viola would proudly say, "Oh, Rita can sing the wedding song." Rita Marley always loved singing, especially in church. But the moment that changed everything for her came when she was just 10 years old. Back then, one of the biggest things on the radio in Jamaica was a Saturday afternoon show called Opportunity Knocks on RJR, one of only 2 radio stations in the country. For kids growing up in tough neighborhoods like Trenchtown, this show wasn't just for fun. It was a real chance to be seen and heard. Winning could lead to small prizes, a bit of money, or even help from groups like the Girl Guides. Sometimes, it even gave kids the rare chance to travel outside Kingston. One day, Rita's aunt turned to her and asked, "Rita, do you want to try out for the radio?" She believed in Rita's voice completely. Rita competed and also won. After her big radio win, she kept singing. Most evenings, she and her cousin Constantine Dream would meet under the plum tree in the yard to practice songs they heard on the radio. Their voices blended sweetly in the warm night air, turning the yard into their little stage. Sometimes Marlene Gifford, one of Rita's closest friends, would join them. One night, while they were preparing for one of their usual backyard performances, Rita looked at them and said, "You know, we could form a group." In Trenchtown, nearly everyone was into music. People were always singing, strumming guitars, or trying to start their own group. Everyone around them was talking about artists like Toots and the Maidles, Delroy Wilson, the Paragons, Ken Booth, and the rising star Marcia Griffiths. These singers were shaping Jamaica's sound and inspiring young dreamers everywhere. But for Rita, one group that stood out above them all was the Wailing Wailers. Their music had a raw power that hit differently. Wailing Wailers had recorded several rock-steady songs at a studio, just a short walk from Rita homes in Trenchtown. To Rita, they were neighbors making it big, and they gave her hope that maybe she could do the same. It wasn't long before Coxsone Dodd released an album called The Wailing Wailers, and behind the strong, soulful voices of the Wailers were the sweet harmonies of a female trio called the Solettes. Rita Marley was one of those voices. As their name grew and more performance requests came in, the group's lineup began to shift. 2 young women, Cecile Campbell and Hortense Lewis, started filling in for Dream. Sometimes Dream couldn't travel with the group because he was still in school or simply too young for certain shows. Performing live was a whole new kind of thrill for Rita. She loved everything about it, the hot stage lights, the rhythm flowing through her body, and the way the crowd reacted to her voice. While her fame grew, so was her relationship with Bob Marley. The two spent a lot of time rehearsing together, learning from each other, and pushing one another to improve. They supported each other like brother and sister, with deep respect and encouragement. That solid friendship would become the foundation for something much greater later on. Bob Marley cared deeply about Rita, not just as a friend or bandmate, but as someone he truly wanted to see succeed. He would often sit her down and speak to her like a big brother, giving her advice about the music world. He once told her, "You're a nice girl, don't get caught up with these men. They'll use you, leave you with babies, and you'll forget who you are." Bob saw Rita's talent and wanted her to take her future seriously. He will say, "You have to choose. If you really love music, stick with it. But if you still want to be a nurse, then go for it. Just make up your mind and give it your all, whichever path you take." Meanwhile, the Soulettes were still recording and building their name. They released songs like "Time for Everything," "Turn, Turn, Turn," which was a Jamaican version of a song written by folk singer Pete Seeger. Their voices blended beautifully on tracks like "Friends and Lovers," "One More Chance," and "That Ain't Right," where the Wailers even joined them in harmony. Even though Rita had been around music most of her life, listening to the radio and singing in church, she hadn't really experienced the nightlife that surrounded Jamaica's growing music scene. Her childhood was strict, and she wasn't allowed to do the things other kids did, like going to dance halls. That changed one day when Bob finally agreed to take her to a dance. By then, the Wailers were huge in Jamaica. Their songs were everywhere, on the radio, blasting through speakers, and played over and over in the dance halls. At first, Bob was unsure. He said, "There's a dance tomorrow, but I don't think I should take you. It might get rough. Someone might start a fight." But Rita was curious. With a smile on her face, she answered, "No, I want to see the fight." The first time Rita Marley walked into a dance hall, it felt like stepping into another world. People moved in wild, free ways, bumping, grinding, letting the rhythm take over their bodies. Rita had grown up in a strict home, so this was nothing like what she was used to. Just like Bob had warned her, fights were common at these dances. There were no guns back then, but men carried knives, and some would break bottles in a flash of anger. More than once, Bob had to pull Rita away from the chaos. If things got too heated, he'd grab her hand and lead her out of the crowd, dodging flying bottles and shouting voices. But what truly stood out to Rita wasn't the excitement of the dance hall, it was Bob himself. What impressed her most was his heart. Bob Marley paid attention and cared about people, deeply especially about her, and even more about her child. He never treated Rita like just another girl hanging around the music scene. He saw her as a mother, someone with real duties. And he made sure she remembered that too. If a studio session went on too long, he would stop and say gently, "Rita, you sure you can stay longer than this? Your baby don't want titty? You don't want to go home, feed the baby, then come back?" And that kind of steady support changed her. But even though Rita knew the truth, Bob had other girls. It wasn't a secret, and she didn't pretend not to notice. He wasn't perfect, but he always treated her with a special kind of respect. Whatever else he had going on, he never brought it into her space. By the mid-1960s, the Soulettes were one of the top female groups in Jamaica. The Wailing Wailers, Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and Bunny Wailer were already legends in the making. Clement Dodd, the legendary producer behind Studio One, played a key role in shaping Bob's early journey. Bob once told Rita how much Coxsone's words meant to him. Bob said, "He looked me straight in the eye and told me, 'Be strong, think, you can make music, write, sing.'" There wasn't much money coming in at the time, but those words stayed with Bob. They gave him the strength to keep writing, keep singing, keep going, especially when life outside the studio felt almost unbearable. At home, things were rough. Bob lived with a man named Taddy, who had once been close to Bob's mother, but whatever kindness might have been there in the past was long gone. One evening, Bob opened up to Rita, saying, "Rita, I can't take this anymore." He continued saying, "Every night when Taddy comes home, he wakes me up to serve his dinner. Doesn't wake his own son, just me. Nesta, Nesta, wake up, hot up me food." And I have to get up and do it, no matter how late it is. Then in the morning, I'm the houseboy again. That same night, Bob had enough. He picked himself up and walked with Rita straight to Studio One. When he got there, he told Coxone everything. The older man listened quietly. At first, he simply said, "If you feel it's right, Robbie." But then, seeing how tired and defeated Bob looked, he gave a small smile and added, "Well, Robbie, there's an audition room in the back. You can sleep there at night." From that night on, something changed between Rita and Bob. He began to trust her not just as a friend, but as someone he could really depend on. Rita started writing letters to his mother in the US, helping him sort out immigration papers, and keeping him updated on everything happening back home. They became close, rehearsing late into the night, talking about their dreams, sharing their fears. Sometimes as the sky got dark and the streets grew quiet, Bob would look at her softly and say, "Why should you have to go?" And Rita, always thinking of her aunt, would answer, "It's 10 o'clock. You know how Auntie is. After 8, you can't walk through that gate." Rita's auntie was strict. She didn't just wait at the door. She would stand at the gate, watching like a guard dog. One night, as they were walking slowly from Coxone's studio back to Trenchtown, Bob looked different. There was a strange look in his eyes. He told Rita that something's been happening. He told her that every night, after the studio closed and the watchman locked up, he would lie down in the audition room to sleep. And every night, without fail, a cat would show up. It didn't just meow. It cried loud, long, and in a way that sounded almost like it was calling someone's name. She could feel the fear in his voice, and she couldn't stop thinking about him there, alone on the cold floor, while she had a bed in a room. That night, she made a decision. She said, "Bob, I'll leave the window by my bed open. After you walk me home, just come in and stay with me. Not for anything else, just to rest." So, they had a plan. Rita came home, smiled at her aunt, and tried to act normal. Her auntie said, "Why you come in so late? You have a baby already. You don't want another one, especially when the father gone to England." Rita tried to calm her down, saying, "Auntie, I'm working. I'm trying my best." She went to her room, and Bob quietly slipped in through the window, just as they agreed. But not long after, Auntie came back, this time holding baby Sharon. As she stepped into the room, she noticed something moving under the bed and then said, "Who's under there?" "I see something moving." Rita panicked, saying it must be her cousin, but her auntie shouted back that her cousin is in his bed. She stared again, and then her eyes went wide. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She demanded to know if Rita had really brought Robbie into the house. She then insisted he had to leave immediately. Bob Marley, caught red-handed, crawled out from under the bed. Rita tried to explain that it wasn't what her aunt thought. She said, "Auntie, it's not what you think. He wasn't even going to stay in my room. He was going to sleep in dreams. But he has nowhere else. He's been sleeping on a door at the studio." But her aunt wouldn't hear it. She was convinced Rita would end up pregnant again, and that she would be the one stuck raising another child. Robbie had to leave. That was the breaking point for Rita. Her voice trembled, but she stood her ground. If he had to leave, she was going with him. She picked up her blanket and told her it wasn't right to send Robbie out so late, not when it was dangerous. So Bob went back out the window, and Rita walked out through the front door. As they stepped into the night, Bob looked over at her and whispered, "Rita, you sure? Auntie gonna kill you tomorrow." And Rita, with nothing but truth in her voice, said, "I don't care. If you are enjoying this video, appreciate it by giving it a thumbs up. And if you have not subscribed, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button." Not long after the drama with Auntie, Rita and Bob did something surprising. They got married. It wasn't a plan they had talked about for months. It happened fast, and for a very practical reason. Immigration. Bob's mother, Cedella Marley, had married an American man named Edward Booker. Because of that, she could now help Bob move to the United States. He was getting ready to leave Jamaica and start a new chapter in America. And even though he and Rita were deeply in love, they hadn't really talked about marriage before. One day, he just told her plainly, "I'm not going unless you'll come eventually." Bob had his worries. He didn't want to be far away and wondered if someone else might catch Rita's heart. Maybe she would have waited for him, maybe not, but he wasn't willing to take that chance. So, on February 10th, 1966, just after Bob turned 21, they got married. It wasn't a fancy wedding. Rita was only 19. They didn't have money or anything grand, but what they did have was love and support from the people around them. Coxone Dodd, the producer who believed in Bob, bought him a black suit and shoes. Rita's aunt made her wedding dress and veil. It was simple, but it was enough. Soon after the wedding, Bob left for Wilmington, Delaware. There, he got a job at the DuPont Hotel and worked for a few months to help his mother. While he was gone, Rita kept singing. Her cousin, Constantine Walker, stepped in to sing with the Wailers and filled Bob's spot during that time. But not everyone was happy about the marriage. Bob's mother, Cedella, didn't know about it until later. When she found out, she sent her sister to go check on Rita and her living situation. What the aunt saw didn't impress her. The house had thin cardboard walls and magazine pages used as decoration. To them, it looked poor and childish. And on top of that, Rita already had a baby from a past relationship. In the eyes of Bob's American relatives, that was one more reason to disapprove. Still, no matter what they thought, Bob didn't change his mind. He stayed committed to the girl he married and the life they had started together. When Bob Marley moved to Wilmington, Delaware, he was supposed to be chasing a better life. He got a job at the DuPont Hotel, tried to settle into a new routine, and even had his family pushing him toward a different future. His American relatives introduced him to other women, hoping he'd forget about Rita and leave his Jamaican life behind. But that's not what happened. After just 8 months, Bob came back home. He couldn't stay away. Not from the music, not from Jamaica, and definitely not from Rita. When he returned, his mother was shocked. She couldn't understand why he gave up what many people dreamed of in America: money, comfort, just to be with Rita. As soon as he got back, Rita jumped straight into work. Music had always been something they shared, but now it had to be more than just love for sound. It had to feed them, build their future. The Wailers were always in the studio, writing, rehearsing, and recording. But someone had to take care of everything outside those walls. Someone had to get the music heard. That someone became Rita. To take control of their careers, Bob, Rita, Peter, and Bunny created their own label, Wailin' Soul-Um. The name blended the Wailers and the Soulettes. They made the music, pressed the records, and even carried them around town to sell. Rita didn't stop singing. She still joined Bob and others like Cecile and Hortense on songs, including a beautiful version of Hold On to This Feeling. But beyond singing, she became the one out on the streets, making sure those songs reach people's ears. She would visit radio stations with copies in hand, drop off vinyl at record shops, and hustle to get the music into the hands of anyone who might care. Bob and Rita rented a single room together. The room faced the road, so they turned the front into a tiny music shop. And behind a small cashier's booth, they built themselves, using scrap wood and wire. They sold 7-inch vinyl records. On good days, they might sell 25. On slow ones, only a few. But they kept going. Rita was also the one riding through the streets of Kingston with records strapped to her back. Day after day, she pedaled on a bicycle, delivering music by hand. It wasn't fancy work, but it was what kept Wailin' Soul-Um going. Life at home was no easier. They didn't have a proper kitchen, so Rita had to cook outside, right there in the doorway of their room. Dinner was made on a small coal fire, which wasn't easy to start or keep burning. With 2 little children to look after and barely any space, every evening felt like a small battle, and when food came late or stress got too heavy, arguments would break out between her and Bob. Sometimes those fights got loud, sometimes even physical. If Bob raised a hand, Rita didn't just stand there. She fought back. That was her nature, quick to stand her ground, quick to cry too. She might throw the first slap, but she also felt the first sting. When she got hurt, Bob would usually calm down. He'd look at her and say something like, "You made me do it," not to excuse himself, but to try and make peace before the night ended. When Bob and Rita Marley moved to New York, their love faced a different kind of test. In the world of music, record companies had their own ideas about how stars should look to the public, and they didn't want Bob to seem like a married man. They believed that if fans, especially female fans, knew Bob had a wife, they might lose interest. A husband wasn't as exciting as a single man. So, behind closed doors, the people in charge told Bob to keep quiet about his marriage. Rita didn't know any of this, not until she read it in the newspaper. It was an article with a big interview. A reporter had asked Bob, "Is it true you're married to Rita?" And Bob's answer was cold and clear. "Oh no, she's my sister." That night, when they were alone in their apartment, Rita laid the newspaper down on the table. He glanced at the paper and shrugged like it was nothing. She looked at him and said, "What does this mean, Bob? Why did you tell them we're not married?" Bob just said calmly, "That's show business." And anyway, who wants to expose you? You're mine. Rita didn't understand it. It didn't feel right. But then Bob stood up, reached for her hand, and said something he always said when he wanted to calm things down. Just cool. So she tried. She told herself that being his wife wasn't the only thing that mattered. She was also his friend, his partner, the one who held things together. That mindset helped her later, especially when more women started appearing, when more people began asking strange questions. Some would say, "Is it true you're Bob's sister?" And Rita would say, "I'm his sister. And I'd rather be a good sister than a miserable wife." In the early 1970s, Bob Marley bought an old, run-down house at 56 Hope Road in uptown Kingston. The place wasn't fancy, it had a few small buildings and needed a lot of work. It was actually Chris Blackwell, the record producer, who first thought of using the house as a space where musicians could gather, rehearse, and build their sound. But after Bob's album Catch a Fire was released, things changed. The house became his. And later, it was officially part of his deal with the record label. Hope Road turned into more than just a home. It became a center of music, ideas, and energy for Bob and his team. But along with that came something else. More attention, more people, and more women. Bob was now a rising star, and the world was starting to notice. Women like Diane Jobson, a smart lawyer, and Cindy Breakspeare, who would later win Miss World, were regular faces around the house. They were beautiful, educated, light-skinned, and curious about Bob's world. And Bob, charismatic and full of fire, was hard to resist. He began sleeping there more often. Rita noticed the change, but she didn't run after him. Bob's relationships with other women didn't start or stop with any one name. There were many. Some of them had children. But Rita stayed. Not because she was weak, and not because she didn't care. She stayed because she saw her role differently. That way of thinking helped her survive the pain. Yes, there were times when her heart ached. But instead of looking through the eyes of jealousy, Rita chose to see through the eyes of Rastafari. That gave her peace. It gave her purpose. Over time, Rita even helped raise some of Bob's children from other relationships. And through it all, Bob never stopped being a kind father and a true friend to her. That's why, despite everything, she still respected him. As Bob Marley became more famous, he spent less and less time at home. The music, the tours, the interviews, everything pulled him farther away. That left Rita with more responsibility than ever. Life wasn't easy, but she wasn't completely alone. Her friend Gabby, the same woman who had helped her find the house in Bull Bay, now lived just next door. Gabby was always there to check in, lend a hand, or simply keep Rita company when things got hard. Another strong presence in Rita's life was Owen Tacky, a well-known Jamaican footballer. When he and Rita became close at first, there was nothing romantic about it. He knew she was married. He also knew she wasn't being treated the way she deserved. Tacky watched as Bob stayed away more often and became openly involved with other women. He didn't keep quiet about it either. He spoke to Bob directly, asking him why he was hurting someone who had been loyal from the very beginning. But Bob didn't like the idea of another man getting close to his wife, even though he was barely around himself. One morning, after coming back from a tour, Bob heard from neighbors that Rita and Tacky had gone down to the river together to fetch water. The water pipes in Bull Bay weren't reliable, and the river was the only place to fill up buckets. Still, when Bob heard the news, he lost his temper. He showed up at the river, another woman sitting beside him in his car, and marched straight down to where Rita and Tacky were standing. He said, "Hey Tacky, you seen my woman?" Tacky didn't get angry. He looked at Bob calmly and said, "No, Bob. We're not gonna fight. We're brothers. I'm just helping her. You should respect that." Bob paused. Maybe it was Tacky's calm voice. Maybe it was the truth staring him in the face. But the fire in his eyes faded. He didn't say another word. But Rita had heard enough. She turned to Bob, her face full of fury and pain, and said, "So after everything you're doing, you're going to come and accuse me? What about that woman sitting in your car? What about all the women you've been running around with?" By 1973, things had gotten worse between Bob and Rita. Bob was no longer hiding the other women in his life. He was bringing them around openly, right into Rita's space. One woman, in particular, made Rita uneasy. Her name was Diane Jobson, a young woman who later became Bob's lawyer. Rita noticed how close they seemed. Something about the way they interacted didn't sit right. When Rita asked Bob about these women, his answer was always the same: calm, casual, and dismissive. He will say, "This one's for this, and that one's for that. Everyone has a purpose." To Rita, it felt like a game. But she was tired of pretending. She had stayed loyal, held the house together, raised the kids, and supported the music. One day, she finally told him the truth in plain words. "If this is the life you want, fine, but we're not going to share a bed anymore. Not like that. We're still family. We'll raise our children together. We'll support each other. But I won't be part of this circus. Not as your wife, not as your woman." It was during this time that Rita got pregnant with Tacky's child, Stephanie Marley. Nonetheless, Bob adopted Stephanie as one of his own. In the years that followed, Marley had children outside his marriage with 3 other women before he died. What do you think about Rita Marley's story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest content.